By the power vested in me, I hereby constitute this assembly as a legal congregation of the University of Pretoria. During this assembly, degrees and diplomas with all the associated rights and privileges will be conferred and awarded to the candidates whose names appear in the program. Please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we request you to join us in silent prayer or meditation to give thanks for achievements of our students. Thank you very much. It is now my pleasure to welcome you to this graduation. I extend a hearty word of welcome to you all, the Registrar, Professor C. Nicholson, the Dean, Professor C. Diaga, the Deputy Dean, Professor Ratluane, the Deputy Dean, Professor Tienkamp, the chairpersons of schools, heads of departments, directors and honorary professors, and other lecturers and their spouses. The representative of the Student Representative Council will present the academic honorary colors. All persons to whom degrees will be conferred and diplomas awarded this afternoon. All spouses, parents and other parties, and all dignitaries are joining us today. As Chancellor of the University, it's my pleasant task to actually say a few congratulatory words to the graduates. We congratulate them heartily for their achievements, for staying the course and actually managing to attain their qualifications. And we wish them the very best in their careers. We also thank the parents, the families, and friends for their support. It takes many years to actually acquire a university qualifications. I also, as Chancellor, want to thank the executive leadership of the university, the dean, the professors, and all members of faculty for another very successful year, for contributing to South Africa another crop of well-trained professionals. Our country needs each and every one of you. The biggest outcry is the quality of leadership and also quality of professionals across the board. Whether we talk teachers, nurses, government officials who deliver services directly, there is an outcry in the private sector for skilled people. So the problems that in government and state-owned enterprises have been highlighted in the commissions of inquiry, and that needs no elaboration. Serious concerns have been raised about corruption, dishonesty, and lack of commitment to serve the public interest. Linked to all these is lack of requisite knowledge and competencies by those at the coal face of delivery in our institutions. The University of Pretoria has equipped you with the knowledge and competencies to be able to perform at the right level. As you leave, you must be proud of what you have learned at this university and also be confident that you can deliver. But of course, now that you have acquired the qualifications, it is now up to you. As professionals, I believe that it is our duty, it is your duty as you join our ranks, to remember that always you must be a role model. You must never be found wanting in terms of knowledge in your area of specialization. That you have come, as far as you have come at the university, it's very important that you keep up to date and make sure that in terms of the knowledge in your area of specialization, you are never found wanting. Secondly, as you learned during the years, is hard work and honesty that in the end leads to success. So impeccable integrity should be what characterizes your conduct, the choices that you make at your places of work, day by day, hour by hour, minute by minute. You must also display unquestionable competence in your work. As I say, the university has equipped you well, so now the ball is in your court. I want also to repeat a message that I shared with the graduates yesterday, that is to repeat that as the University of Pretoria, we condemn gender-based violence unreservedly. We condemn all acts that denigrate and hurt women and children. As a university, we commit ourselves to do the best we can to ensure safety at our universities, and again, to live by these values and by these principles. Equally, we condemn the looting and banning of businesses of our brothers and sisters from other African countries, wherever they come from, Nigeria, the DRC, Eritrea, wherever, all of them, our brothers and sisters. And when they come to South Africa, we must treat them that way. That's how they treated us over many decades when we're in exile. We have to run away from persecution, racism, and exclusion in our own country. We must never forget that. When we ended our freedom, President Mandela made that commitment that what we experience in South Africa will never be repeated. We cannot be the country that is found to be excluding, persecuting others and killing them in our own country. I call on all of us as professionals, especially as staff and students of the University of Pretoria, not to point fingers, but to accept this as a personal responsibility, as a personal duty, that each one of us must ask himself or herself every day about your conduct, whether it reflects the respect, the dignity with which we should treat all human beings, and the love that we should show to our brothers and sisters from the rest of the continent. As we congratulate you today, and we wish you well in your careers, and thank your parents and family for their support, let's remember these big challenges that we face as a country. May we give a round of applause to all the graduates today. I now call on the Dean to present the candidates that are receiving the degrees this afternoon.
Mr. Chancellor, the supervisors will now introduce the doctoral candidates in the School of Medicine. Doctor of Medicine, Doctor of Philosophy, and Doctor of Science.
Thank you.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Hela Louise Kleitz. Start again. Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Hela Louise Kleitz, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Medicine with a thesis titled Clinical Prediction Models for the Risk-Adjusted Outcomes in South African Surgical Patients, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Bruce Bicard of the University of Cape Town as co-supervisor. The Promovenda developed statistical models to predict the risk of in-hospital mortality and healthcare resources usage preoperatively. Data from two distinct socio-economically different cohorts of South African surgical patients were used for this evaluation. The thesis identified, described, and evaluated clinical predictors and their relationship with the measured outcomes. The clinical utility of these prediction models can be realized once these prediction models are also validated and updated in cohorts different from where they were developed. The paucity of available perioperative data can then be addressed by using these prediction models to define a core set of measures for further research and implementation on perioperative care in South Africa to improve outcomes. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Medicine on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce you to Jolene Michelle Helena, who has complied with the requirements of her degree, Doctor of Philosophy, under my supervision, Prof. Annie Joubert and Dr. Peace Mabeta. In her thesis entitled Radiosensitization Capacity of a Novel Estradiol Analog Assessed on a Bone Metastases Model, the Promovenda investigated the potential radiosensitizing effects of an in silico designed 2-methoxy derivative in an in vitro deconstructed bone metastases model. This comprised of the representative components, namely tumor, bone, and vasculature. The preferential targeting of tumor survival through the induction of deoxyribonucleic acid damage and apoptotic cell death was demonstrated by using modified protocols. The possible inhibition of tumor neovascularization through the suppression of angiogenic migration and signaling was also illustrated. Lastly, the retention of differentiation capacity, enzyme activity, and morphological characteristics in osteoclasts could be extrapolated to the preservation of bone integrity. Results obtained from this study indicated that this low-dose combination therapy could have the potential for treating bone metastases while limiting the adverse effects. Mr. Chancellor, I ask you to request the degree on this candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations, man.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Nabila Ismail, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy, with a thesis entitled Genetic Basis of In Vitro Resistance for Reserved Drugs Against Mycobacterium Tuberculosis, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Saeed Omar as a co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda studied the potential to generate resistance against 3 key drugs used in the treatment of drug-resistant tuberculosis. The promovenda invented a seminal in vitro technique to generate mutants resistant to bedaquiline, clofazimine, and linezolid. Her work identified resistance-associated genetic mechanisms and the existence of cross-resistance between clofazimine and bedaquiline as a result of a shared efflux pathway was confirmed. The technique was then used to generate mutants from clinical Mycobacterium tuberculosis isolates with a variety of pre-existing resistance profiles to demonstrate the potential for resistance acquisition to bedaquiline and clofazimine. The findings presented in her thesis contribute greatly to the understanding the appropriate deployment of bedaquiline and clofazimine in treatment regimens for drug-resistant tuberculosis, and ultimately contribute to improving patient outcomes. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I am Professor Ronnie Anderson of the Department of Medical Immunology. I have the privilege of representing Professor Mike Satechi, who is currently overseas, and the pleasure of introducing to you Mklatsi Cordelia Mokenyetse Kokolo, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Genomic and Biomarker Analysis of Xeroderma pigmentosum in South Africa, prepared under the supervision of Professor Mike Satechi with Dr. Cecile Ged and Dr. Fanny Maurice Picard of the University of Bordeaux as co-supervisors. In her thesis, the promovendus presented the findings of her research focused on identifying the predominant genetic mechanisms responsible for development of the condition known as Xeroderma pigmentosum. This is an uncommon, inherited, life-threatening disorder in the South African setting, which results from the failure of mechanisms that repair damage to the genetic material following exposure to sunlight. This in turn predisposes for development of often serious recurring skin cancers. The study, the first of its type to be undertaken in South Africa, involved mostly young black South Africans in whom XPC was identified as the most frequent complementation group. Importantly, 3 novel dysfunctional missense variants of the XPD gene were also detected. The XPE complementation group was identified in white patients. In addition, 2 inflammation-related cancer-associated biomarkers were also found to be elevated in the circulation of a significant number of patients, thereby identifying chronic inflammation as a possible secondary contributor to disease pathogenesis. These findings may provide the basis for future development of corrective gene-targeted therapies in patients with Xeroderma pigmentosum. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Michelle Lowe, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Molecular Epidemiology of Clinical Carbapenem-Resistant Klebsiella pneumonia Isolates in South Africa, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Johan Patou as co-supervisor. In her thesis, the provenda studied the genetic relatedness, epidemiological profiles, and antibiotic resistance genes of Klebsiella pneumonia isolates obtained from a private diagnostic laboratory. Rapid molecular screening assays were used to identify and track the emergence of carbapenem-resistant Klebsiella pneumonia clones across 8 provinces in South Africa over a period of 4 years. The rapid and successful dissemination of one dominant clone, sequence type 307, a globally emerging multi-drug resistant clone, was described in her study. Whole genome sequencing was used to further elucidate the genomic characteristics of the sequence type 307 Klebsiella pneumonia isolates. Rapid molecular assays combined with whole genome sequencing are powerful tools to track the emergence and dissemination of resistant clones in real time, thereby impacting on the treatment and management of patients. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Amanda Mlefano, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with the thesis entitled The Evaluation of a Gallium-68 Casitoline-derived peptide as an infection imaging agent. In her thesis, The Evaluation of a Gallium-68 Casitoline-derived peptide as an infection imaging agent, the provenda aimed to synthesize and evaluate 2 gallium-68 labeled bioconjugates, DOTA CDP1 and Nudaga CDP1, as potential imaging agents for the detection of early onset tuberculosis, primarily in the complicated cases such as those with underlying comorbidities, to develop a to develop a radiosynthesis procedure for each gallium-68 bioconjugate, as well as a new analytical method with radio-HPLC to characterize the tracers. The radiolabeling properties of the tracer were compared, and each tracer was validated through rigorous stability testing in various environments. Gallium-68 DOTA CDP1 exhibited better stability and therefore progressed to in vitro bacterial uptake, cytotoxicity, and mammalian cell binding studies. The gallium-68 DOTA CDP1 demonstrated significant higher uptake in E. coli, followed by Staphylococcus aureus and Mycobacterium smegmatis. No cytotoxicity was observed due to minimal binding and internalization of the tracer. A tracer pharmacokinetic profile was established through positron emission tomography in healthy mice. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree to the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Councillor, I introduce to you Magdalena Elizabeth Scholes, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Cardiovascular Magnetic Resonance in Patients with HIV Infection, assessing the structure and functional abnormalities associated with remodeling of the myocardium, prepared under my supervision with Professor James Kerr Sr. and Professor Ntobeko Ntuzi as co-supervisors. In her thesis, the promovenda evaluated the remodeling that occurred in the myocardium as imaged with cardiovascular magnetic resonance in patients infected with HIV. The study found that HIV infection is associated with subtle early functional abnormalities and focal myocardial fibrosis in asymptomatic, untreated young patients without risk factors for cardiac disease. The early detection of cardiac involvement is important, as this may reduce the future cardiovascular events that may help to attenuate the clinical impact of the epidemic of cardiovascular disease in sub-Saharan Africa. Mr. Councillor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Kim Shiva, who has compiled with the requirements of the degree Doctor of Philosophy the thesis titled Mass Spectrometry-Based Proteome Profiling of Acute Wound Healing Processes in a Porcine Model. This was prepared under the supervision of Professor Duncan Cromatry and myself as co-supervisor. In her work, advanced complementary mass spectrometry techniques were applied to define both the spatial and kinetic changes occurring between the proteome, metabolome, and lipidome of wound regions during acute wound healing. Spatial imaging by matrix-assisted laser desorption ionization mass spectrometry, coupled with optimized multivariate statistical analysis, characterized kinetic changes and revealed key time points and molecular features during healing. New protein extraction techniques followed by liquid chromatography, high-resolution tandem mass spectrometry revealed 18 proteins as potential wound healing phase markers. The results could classify changes occurring during the progression of wound healing. Potential identification of drug targets in non-healing chronic wounds has been made possible by using small, well-defined sets of targeted molecular features associated with specific healing phases. Mr. Chancellor, I request you confer the degree to the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Jumri Stein, who has compiled with me the requirements of the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Culicoides midges as Potential Vectors for Neurological Arboviruses and the Prevalence of Infection at the Wildlife-Livestock-Human Interface. This was prepared under my supervision with co-supervision by Dr. Gert Venter and Dr. Anne Cohen as co-supervisors. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations, ma'am.
Mr. Chancellor, on this occasion I have the privilege of representing Professor Michael Pepper and the pleasure of introducing you to Kondisi Shabalala, who's complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Human Leukocyte Antigen Diversity in South African Populations, prepared under the supervision of Professor Michael Pepper with Professor Alan Christoffels of University of the Western Cape as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus highlighted the paucity of HLA diversity data currently available on southern African populations despite the clinical importance of this issue. HLA is the abbreviation for human leukocyte antigen. The current lack of HLA diversity data on South African populations has undoubtedly hampered understanding of genetic diversity in genes encoding the human immune system in this setting. The data generated from this work is therefore a potential future resource to support HLA disease association, population genetic, organ and tissue transplantation, and anthropological studies. This research has also demonstrated the feasibility of using in silico computational methods to understand HLA diversity through analysis of existing next-generation DNA sequencing data sets, especially in resource-limited settings. It is envisaged that South African HLA data emanating from this study will better inform disease association studies and donor recruitment strategies in organ transplantation, as well as population-based vaccine development. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Professor James Kerr, who has complied with all the requirements for the degree Doctor of Science, with a thesis titled Clinical Presentation and Echocardiographic Diagnosis of Rare and Subtle Congenital Cardiovascular Abnormalities in the Adult, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Greg Tintinger as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus submitted 36 articles published by him during the preceding 13 years. These articles all have a central theme, namely the clinical and echocardiographic presentation of cardiovascular anomalies in the adult. These articles have all been published in international peer-reviewed journals with significant impact. Also, these 36 articles have been widely cited, and some have been included in textbooks on cardiology. His articles have therefore contributed to the specific field of study in cardiology and are currently guiding further research in this field, as evidenced by the number of citations of his work. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Science on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Medicine in Surgery. Moleche Molifalu. Mpo Ramapulana. Tabo Rampai. Roinek Seau. In urology, Trevino Riedgard. In anesthesiology, Amaury Voliter. In emergency medicine, Suma Rajan with distinction. In internal medicine, Nicole Ruiz. Yolanda van den Berg. In obstetrics and gynecology, Maciej Dzikielewicz. Reynold Nsisi. Teboho Ratsatsinacha. In orthopedics, Rusine Marie Nchela. Masters of Medicine in Pathology, in Chemical Pathology, Jakubeth Charlie Matsau. In forensic pathology, Donovan Lewitz. Kenalemang Morobadi. In psychiatry, Wilhelmina Erasmus. Kim Ives. Natalie Paul. Nicolaas van der Merwe with distinction. In public health medicine, which is actually in the School of Health Systems and Public Health, Lerato Pitsu. In radiological diagnostics, Khomotso Khubane. Adzihambe Mudau. In a Masters of Science in Anatomy, Halima Natu. Precious Maseko. Sirasha Naidu. In human physiology, Amelia Cockrell with distinction. Robin Duprier with distinction. Tanya Fouchier. In medical immunology, Karina da Silva with distinction. Candice Hurd with distinction. Catherine Wickham with distinction. In medical microbiology, Sharon Willifant. Dr. Zibanze. In medical virology, Hlengiwe Nkambule with distinction. Alicia Vermeulen with distinction. In pharmacology, Lila Adam. Keith Mube with distinction. Mr. Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Clinical Medical Practice. Ndisi Kanyile. Apologize. Tamsin van Drunik. For the Bachelor of Medicine and Surgery, Andries de Man. Fiona Dominic. Brittany Fourie with distinction. Noziniko Mjamba. Gerhardus Pretorius. Tsai Ching Wang. Mr. Chancellor, the supervisors will now introduce the doctoral candidates in the School of Healthcare Sciences.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Moseline Anneline Rosemary Duplessis, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with the thesis entitled Succession Planning Frameworks for Leadership Development of Educators in Nursing Education Institutions in South Africa, prepared under my supervision and with the co-supervision of Dr. Annetjie van der Walt. The promovandi developed the Succession Planning Framework for Leadership Development of Educators in Nursing Education Institutions in South Africa. Nursing education institutions nationally face a serious challenge. In the next 5 to 10 years, an estimated 84% of nurse educators in South Africa will be eligible for retirement. The shortage of skilled, competent nurse educators is likely to impact negatively on the education and training of nursing students. A mixed method sequential design was used to investigate current succession planning practices and processes for leadership development in higher education institutions in South Africa. A succession planning framework allows internal mentoring and development of potential successors and guarantees the establishment of a talent pool for future leadership positions. Succession planning frameworks are essential to maintain leadership continuity and a stable workforce in the nursing education institutions in South Africa. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations, guys.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Yolandi Hayton, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Co-Constructed Competencies of Facilitators Supporting Newly Qualified Professional Nurses to Meet the Outcomes of a Person-Centered Nurse Residency Program, prepared under my supervision and with the co-supervision of Professor Tanya Hines. In a thesis, the Primavanda identified the needs of newly qualified professional nurses for inclusion in a South African nurse residency program. During a workshop, stakeholders agreed that the program would not realize if the facilitators presenting the program lacked the required competencies. Consequently, the development of the program not only included the outcomes of a newly qualified professional for the newly qualified professional nurses, but also the competencies required of facilitators to support newly qualified professional nurses to meet these outcomes. The program comprised of 6 domains, namely outcomes, objectives, prerequisites, foundational knowledge of the facilitator, person-centered learning environments, and person-centered learning processes. The conceptual framework of the nurse residency program was depicted in the analogy of a growing flower, underpinned by the philosophy of person-centeredness and the ultimate goal of human flourishing for all. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Thank you, bro.
Mr. Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Dietetics. Anshen Martens. Moloko Mihlape. Master of Nursing Science in Clinical Field of Study, Tulule Kubeka. Germarie Nel. Lorraine Nzegele. Roshan Joseph. Naomi Hutton. Celesile Mhlophe. Makubu Mudiba. Nadine Bushisha, with distinction. Beauty Sipileti. M. Esna Swart. In nursing education, come stand here with me. Mikateko Mageza. Petronella Maritz. Mule Lepogole. Ledile Manamela. Ngozi Mba. Kuwa Skosana. Master of Nursing Science in Nursing Management. Kesinteng Umomezulu. Sikitiwe Masuku. Marubini Rambuwani. Mama Zulu with distinction. Well done. Master of Physiotherapy, Mule Kumati. Annelie van Heerden. Mr. Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the postgraduate diploma in vocational rehabilitation. Tubisile Tumalo. Mr. Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Dietetics. Mankung Mapidis Meng. Bachelor of Nursing Science, Nametso Moshole. Bachelor of Nursing Science, Education and Administration, Kakamatsu Disitele. Grace Hayera. Helen Jacobs. Matanaswo Mabunda. Party Mabusela. Mantwa Maimela. Aubrey Malindisa. John Maluleke. Ekuki Manghe. Stefina Maposa. Ramasela Marukani. Raisibe Maseko. Mashimane Masweneng. Motswasele Matabata. Malebeleko Matlala. Molujane Machela. Umbalenhle Mhlambo. Antoinette Moller with distinction. Dimakatsu Monama. Lebohang Monyebodi. Veronica Monyeki. Mapula Manyela. Palesa Motaung. Mahotia Matubatse. Shabekisa Moyo. Johanna Mtombeni. Gladys Mulenga. Mantebeng Nache. Matome Unkuana with distinction. Betty Nkosi. Runel Pruzeski. Marta Ramokolo. Ramadimecha Sehabi. Machala Sai. Bachelor in Occupational Therapy, Kirsten Schroeder. Mr. Chancellor, the supervisors will now introduce the doctoral candidates in the School of Health Systems and Public Health.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Funanani Mashau, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy, with a thesis entitled Health Effects of Chlorinated and Chloraminated Drinking Water on Pregnancy Outcomes in Gauteng and Limpopo provinces, South Africa. Prepared under my supervision as Dr. Espa Jacobeth Ngube and with co-supervision by Professor Kukuvoi. The vendors investigated the potential health effects of drinking water disinfection byproducts on adverse pregnancy outcomes. The results showed an increase in the risk of premature birth and low birth weight related to the levels of total trihalomethanes exposure during the third trimester stage. Urinary trichloroacetic acid was used as a biomarker of internal exposure to the drinking water disinfection byproducts. The urinary trichloroacetic acid concentration levels were high among the study population. However, there were no statistical significant associations between the urinary trichloroacetic acid concentrations and the delivery of premature low birth weight and small for gestational age infants. Likewise, a statistical significance does not always suggest clinical importance. The promovendors recommends that the future studies focus on the underlying biological mechanism to understand the pathways by which disinfection byproducts cause adverse pregnancy outcomes. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce to you Bukola Olugola, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Influence of Air Pollution on the Respiratory Health of Residents Residing in the Vaal and Highveld Air Pollution Priority Areas of South Africa. This thesis was prepared under my supervision and with Prof. Wegman and Dr. Klassen as co-supervisors. In her thesis, the promovenda investigated the association between hospital admission due to respiratory diseases and air pollution in the air pollution priority areas of South Africa. The results showed that vulnerability to ambient air pollution is most common among children under the age of 2, and their susceptibility to respiratory disease is as a result of their developing lungs. On investigating the effect of temperature on respiratory diseases with hospital admission, when air pollutants increased by 10 micrograms per cubic meter, the results showed that more people were admitted on warmer days than on colder days. This information will help the South African policymakers to implement policies for reducing the levels of air pollution. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, I introduce you to Oscar Tepera, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Equity in Access and Utilization of Cervical Cancer Treatment and Palliation Services in Harare, Zimbabwe. Prepared under my supervision and with Professor Greta Dreyer as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus investigated access and uptake of cervical cancer services among women, societal health system determinants, and health service delivery models, and the organization played major roles in entrenching inequities to access and utilization of cervical cancer treatment and palliative care. Social demographic factors played a minor role in explaining disparities in access and uptake of cervical cancer screening, treatment, and palliative care. The study further proposes that following strategies to improve access and use of cervical cancer services: subsidized services, strengthening health education and health worker training, establishment of more screening and treatment health facilities, increasing capacities of existing health facilities, decentralization of some services, and building of multidisciplinary teams of health workers, development and rolling out of standardized guidelines, and redesign of the HIV/AIDS levy to a fund that finances priority disease areas. Mr. Chancellor, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree, Doctor of Philosophy, on the candidate with all associated rights and privileges. Congratulations.
Mr. Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Science, Environmental Health. Zamatimande Kunene. In epidemiology, Ribone Mahungela. Master of Public Health, Lisha Genade. Carla Hollenbach. Cosmas Kemba. Cholofelo Khaji. Deliwe Mankhane. Rejoice Machaba. Olalet Umbafau. Caroline Motaoleng. Asnath Motsepe. Kuvanganani Mudau. Nontukozo Ndlovu. Mutimani Simono. Francis Baleta. Nomonde Zikundla. Mr. Chancellor, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Dental Surgery in Maxillofacial and Oral Surgery. Chidinya Lebaka. Bachelor of Dental Surgery, Mkhavutele Vuma. Asaf Kitse. Matsidiso Mamecha. Michiel Prinsloo. Nosipiwe Sibanyoni. Thank you, sir.
Well, we have come to the end of the graduation. I thank you all for your attendance, the deans and the registrar, and of course all of you. I think before we part, can again the families, the parents, the friends, give another round of applause. Now we're going to ask the graduates to respond. Give Well, ladies and gentlemen, it has been a wonderful afternoon. Now we have come to the end of the proceedings. Before we close, you are all invited to partake in the refreshments in front of this wall. You are now requested to stand for the singing of the national anthem and to remain standing until the assembly has been dissolved and the academic procession has left the auditorium. Thank you. By the powers vested in me, I hereby dissolve this assembly of the University of Pretoria. Thank you.
So